My name is Alejandra Rubio. I am a fourth year at UCSC. I study psychology and art. My favorite form of art is printmaking. I kind of got into it and never really left. I didn't think I was gonna like it either. I remember when I took my first print class, I was like, "This is too much work, all for a drawing." I was like, "This isn't worth it." And then next thing I know, I was in too deep. Um, but yeah, and like the psych part of me, I like to learn about like social psych and kind of like emotional intelligence, and I mainly want to focus like my psych work around like art therapy and kind of like bringing that back to the community as a form of healing, and like using both art and psych as a form of healing. So yeah, that's kind of me in a gist. Taken a few like feminist study courses at UCSC, and they like that's mainly where I learned the term intersectionality. And from my understanding, it's just like when you have like understanding a person and all of their identities, and how like you can't really separate like a person from their identities, because like their surroundings and like their environment kind of like is constantly impacting them and their identities. So like for example, like me as a Latina woman, like that's one part of my identity, and like whenever I walk out like in public, I know that I'm being perceived as a Latina woman. And like even just being Latina and a woman, like they intersect, because being woman gets like in a society like this has me treated one way, and then adding the layer of Latina on top of it adds a different layer of like expectations. So yeah, that's like my understanding. I think of it kind of like as layers. You can't really like separate them. You can if you want to like examine them, but it's like a holistic thing. So Latina is like one of my main identities. I hold on to this identity a lot just because I uh, grew up in like a Latina household, raised by a Latina woman, raised by strong Latina women. So my identity as a Latina woman is like something that has like been passed down to me and something that I've learned. Um, so that's one part of my identity. I identify as an artist, and I identify with it as an artist very proudly, just because it took me like years and years of work to like even be able to comfortably call myself an artist. Um, but yeah, I think those are the main identities that I like hold to myself, just because I also feel like sometimes when I have too many identities, I can kind of like lose myself. But those like Latina women and artists are like the main ones that I'm like focused on and like advocate for constantly. Yeah, so I created, it's called a Festival of Art and Solidarity, a POC showcase. And at that event, I showcased a total of 30 artists of color. Um, and four of them were featured artists. So that meant that they had an entire booth of like just dedicated to their work. And I had two performing artists and two groups from campus also performing. And I had live screen printing and what else? A button making station. And it was really cool because like the goal of the event just like was to showcase artists of color, but it was to showcase artists of color across mediums. And it was a really good turnout. I had a lot of really cool artists. I had an artist who had video games and like a board game. And they were like queer, and they were like centered around like that artist identity. And then I had prints, because I'm a printmaker and I harassed all my printmaker friends to submit work. And I had people who were like sculptors and painters. And then I had people making like live art. So I had someone on stage doing like an origami sculpture, an oversized origami sculpture. And then you were there making tortillas at the event, which was really cool. Um, so yeah, that was a rundown of like the day and what was there. So I think it's a very interesting story because it started with myself and like what I needed. So like as I mentioned before, like it took me a while to be able to accept myself as an artist. Just because growing up in like a Latina household, like my mom and my dad were never really supportive of like me trying to do art or like thinking about doing art. So I remember like as a kid growing up, like I would be like, oh, I want to go to art school, and they would be like, no, you have to go to college and like get a degree because you need to find a job. And at the time, like hearing that as a kid, like it impacted me in a way where I like felt like I couldn't pursue art, or like I had to do it in secret, or like I couldn't be an artist. Especially growing up, like I didn't really see that many like Chicana artists or Latina artists. So like I didn't really think of it as like a possibility or like something tangible. So I ended up coming to Santa Cruz as a computer science major, despite knowing that I wanted to do art and psych, just because I thought I could like I figured computer science was the best way of like getting my family out of poverty and like getting myself a good job. Like I felt like that market was always going to be up and growing, just considering like the way that technology goes. um but the more like I learned about myself, the more I realized that that wasn't it for me, and I had to do art and psych because like that was like what was driving me. But when I started all my art classes, it was just super intimidating, and I couldn't figure out why, because like I consider myself like a very social person and outgoing. I like talking, I like people, but in my art classes I was just like shut down. Like I really didn't talk to anyone. I kind of like stayed to myself. I would go to class, I would do what I needed to do, but I really wouldn't engage with anyone besides like my professor. um and then I started taking writing for artists, which is like one of the classes that you have to take as an art major, and that class makes you reflect a lot on like your own work and like the your own experiences as an artist. And at this point, like I had reached the point where I was invested enough in my art major to consider myself an artist, but I was still having a really hard time like accepting it. And in that class, I remember the lecture that they brought Jameen Lee, which is a printmaking professor, and she was giving a presentation on residencies, and like seeing her like as a woman of color, like talking about like all these amazing things that she's done and all these places that she's gotten to go, like it gave me an anxiety attack in class. Like I was like freaking out. I was like, what, like this is real? Like you can do things with your art major, like it's not just about like creating, like you can actually make careers out of this. um and coming to that realization made me feel panicked, because I realized in that moment that like I've never had the opportunity to even think of art as like a legit thing. um and so by the end of that anxiety attack, I was just kind of like, I can't be the only one that feels this. Like there is no way that out of 150 people in this room, I was the only one that felt like kind of like a new understanding of art, or like our new, I want to say like feeling. um so I ended up talking to one of the few people that I like actually talked to in my art classes, and he's also a person of color, and we were going back and forth, and as we were talking I started understanding kind of like the issues that artists of color kind of experience being in this field. And a lot of it comes back down to like imposter syndrome, like believing that you're not like meant to be in that space for like some reason, like I don't know, like there's not enough representation, or maybe you don't see enough faculty members that look like you, or like faculty members that are different backgrounds. So I began kind of like reflecting on my own through that class, because by the end of the class we had to come up with like a project that that we would want to pursue in the future. And by the end of that class, I had done so much work in trying to understand like what is it that people of color, like, or artists of color experience when trying to enter art fields. What are some of the challenges that we experience, and like how do we go about creating a space for ourselves, and like creating space for ourselves in a field where it's like white dominated. Um, so by the end of that class, I had actually like wrote this whole proposal on basically the idea of my event. It was at a different place at the time because I hadn't actually planned the logistics. And I was like, this is a really good idea. And I kind of wanted to pursue it. And I started talking to like all my friends about it. And I was like, wouldn't this be kind of cool? Like if there was like a art event and like everyone was invited and it was only people of color. And they were like, yeah, like you should do it. But again, because at that time I really didn't talk to anyone, it was just kind of like hard to like imagine something like that coming to life. But at the end of that class, our professor allowed us to do a presentation on like either our proposal or like our own work. And so I was like, I just kept having the feeling of like, you should do this. Like, this is something that like this place needs. Like, and more than anything, it was something that I needed. Like, I wanted to connect with other like folks of color and artists of color. So I took the chance and I pitched my idea in the class, and it was really intimidating. I thought about walking out, but I didn't, and I did it. And next thing I know, it was just kind of like one thing left to another. Like it was a domino effect. I ended up starting to talk to people who were really into like helping me. And then spring quarter of 2018, I pitched the idea to the Coco. And then from there on, it was just like full speed ahead. So it was a bit difficult at first, just because I really didn't know, like I've never been to an event like the one that I was trying to create. So I really didn't know like who to talk to or like where to go. So one of the first people that I went to go talk to was Kat from SOAR. She's great. And I started talking to her about this idea that I was having, and she was like, oh, like you should start pitching your idea to like some of the colleges, resource centers, and see like what they have to say. And so I started kind of like reaching out to like people, talking to people. And at that time there was a show about I don't remember the title of the show, but it was like about like immigrant stories, and they were looking for artists to submit their work. And I submitted a painting that I had done, and that painting was about like honoring the dreamers and honoring kind of like what it takes for like first gen people of color and undocumented students to earn their degrees. And so I submitted that, and when I went to go visit the venue the day of the event, it was at the Namaste Lounge, and I saw the way that they had set up the room, and I kind of like had a moment where I was like, this is kind of what I want to do. So I started networking and I started talking to the person who had coordinated that event, and I asked them kind of like how they did it and like who like helped them and kind of their own process of putting up a show like that. And they led me to the Coco, and the Coco, like I emailed them, I had sent them my proposal, and I think within that week I met with them. And when I met with them, I was just kind of like pitching it to them. I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is the kind of space I want to create. This is why I want to create it. This is all the stuff that I'm thinking about. And they were on board. They were like, yeah, we're down. And that same day, we ended up picking the date of the event, which was really cool because it made it that much more real. And I remember when we picked the date of the event, it was, so the event happened on February 22nd, 2020. And I'm really big into like astrology and like numerology and like believing that everything is a sign. So when because I didn't pick the date, like they picked it based on like their own calendar and their own things that they had scheduled. And when they picked the date and I saw that it was like 222, then a 2020, I was just kind of like, it's meant to be. Like I'm supposed to be doing this. Like everything is aligning for it to happen. Um, and then yeah, from there on, it was just like over the summer I started kind of like imagining it more. It was a more of an imaginative process, just because again, like this is something that I've never been to, an event that like I've never really seen like come to life. So a lot of it had to be like me kind of like brainstorming ideas and like trying to like creatively imagine how like spaces would look. And so I knew that because I had talked to them, I knew that the event was going to be in the NPR. So I started kind of like imagining that. And then when we came back in the fall, it was like full speed ahead again because the event was going to be the next quarter. And so I started reaching out to like resource centers. I started reaching out to the art community. I sent so many emails. I've gotten so good at emailing because of this event. And yeah, I just kind of started trying to connect with folks. And I feel like the more I tried to connect and like pitch my idea, the more people I met that were very supportive of it. And so it kind of led into like building the community that I was also trying to build for the event. And so by the end of the planning, beginning of winter quarter, I still needed funding. And I was kind of like a little anxious. I was like, am I still going to be able to put this together? I had like the main bones of the structure. Like I had the venue, I had the tables. I was starting to reach out to artists. So I knew that artists were like hearing me, and I started putting up my flyers everywhere. So I knew in terms of advertisement, I was getting there. And at that point I had built a committee, which I wouldn't, like, I always say this, like, in order to put something up, like, you need to think about all the people who helped you get there as well. And I wouldn't be able to have done it without the people on the committee that also helped me. um and so by the end, I think it was like 2 weeks before my event, one of my friends had helped me write like a whole pitch to the student union, and then the student union gave me the rest of the funding for the event. And at that point I had all the artists submitted, and I was kind of just digesting like how many people had submitted and how many people had reached out to me. And it was just kind of like organizing it and like coordinating it. And then the day of, it just kind of like it happened. And it was like very overwhelming the day of the event, just because it had been like so long of like a timeline. Like it's been like basically a whole year when it came down to the event, of me like planning and like talking to people and reaching out and like constantly pushing for this so that the event would happen. And so when the event did happen, I was just kind of like in shock, because it was like overwhelming just seeing it come to life after like a whole year of like imagining it. I'll start with the day before, because the day before I was so anxious, so scared. Um, and I was like frantically screen printing shirts last minute, and I had an event. So I was like really like overwhelmed. And then the day of the event, like I went to go pick up the food, and then I came to drop it off, and we were like setting everything up, and like seeing the like bits and pieces start forming in front of me was really really cool, because like at that point in the morning I had all the artists come in, and I like finally got to like meet these people. And it was really cool because like after like months of emailing them or like contacting them, it was really nice to put like names to faces, because everyone that had submitted work, I had seen like their work before I had seen them. So I really didn't know who these folks were. And so like the moment of like getting to meet them and getting to see them was really cool. And like putting up the work was also really exciting, because like while I was like the main one putting up the work, I was just kind of checking in with the artists and seeing like what they like needed, if they like didn't like that position, if they wanted it displayed differently. Because like although this event was created in my vision, I did it to kind of like cater and like highlight the artists of color, which even though I am one, like I had already done my part of like setting this whole thing up. I wanted to like make sure that artists were also feeling like they were like, you know, like that they had autonomy and that they had like the ability to have say in how their work was displayed. Because oftentimes like I feel like there is not enough say from the artists of how they want their work displayed, and I wanted the artists to be like in the forefront. Like I wanted them to tell me exactly how, like what they wanted and what they needed. So putting up their work was really cool. And then by that time we had like a gap and I thought we were going to be a lot more busy, but the day was just so smooth. Like it was so calm. And so by the time 12 rolled around and we started the event, it was really cool to see people like come back, like the artists come back, and then seeing them like already, and like seeing them show their friends their artwork, or like seeing folks screen printing. And it was really cool because like the screen printing workshop, like I had no idea how that was gonna work at all, and I had asked SAC, which is the Student Artists of Color Coalition. So they're a space on campus that like create space for artists of color. I asked them to volunteer for the screen printing, and it was really cool because like I was kind of like teaching them, and they were like facilitating it, and it was just really cool to like spend the day like making prints, because that's what I do. Like I love printmaking, but it was like getting to make prints in like a very intimate setting. And then I loved like my role for that day. Like I didn't really want to be the one like checking in with folks. Like I checked in with the artists, and like I didn't really want to be the one kind of like constantly checking on things. Like I wanted to enjoy my event. Like that was my goal for the day of. Like I wanted to be as present as possible. I wanted to like kind of enjoy like the fruits of my labor and actually get to connect with the people who I had created the space for. And so yeah, I was mainly screen printing the whole time, but when I wasn't screen printing, I was like talking to the artists, or I was like asking them what they thought, or I was, kind of running around. I also had my own tent like set up with my own work because I was a featured artist, and that was very surreal just because I for the longest time, like once I had accepted that I was an artist, it was really hard for me to think about a style for myself, like an artistic style. And it wasn't until I was in my tent and I saw all my work up that I like really saw kind of like myself and like my work and like my style. Um, and it was really, really nice because like the event itself, like I created it and like made decisions based on like what I would like. So seeing it all come together, like, and it matching like my tent, and the tent matching the flyers, and the flyers matching the programs, and like everything kind of like going coherently was really, really cool. And yeah, like just getting to like see all the art, and like and getting to see all the like artists that made all the work, and like connecting with them, and just like being in the same space as like so many people of color and artists of color too was just so comforting. Like I felt so calm, even though like it was like hectic getting to that point, or like there were moments where like I felt a little uneasy. The day of was just so like comforting, and like the pace of it was really mellow. Like the music was very vibey, and like seeing people like navigate the space was my favorite thing. Like as a psych major, I love to observe people. So I was just like observing the way that people would navigate the space, and like where they would hang out, or like what they would choose to do, or like who they would talk to. Like it was just really, really nice. And like it was really nice just to see so many like people of color and artists of color in one space. And then also being the one that people like, I felt like I talked to so many people, and having that opportunity to just kind of like connect with artists of color and talk about like our own like challenges of getting to this point, or like our own inspiration for our work. Like it was really, really nice. And I also really enjoyed, because I didn't realize how many people's like first show this was, um or like first event, or like first like art show exhibit thing it was. And so like when I found out like that it was a lot of people's first show, it like made me feel so good, because I was like, I'm glad that I was able to like get these folks out here, get their work out here, but also make them feel safe enough that they could do that. So yeah, I don't know, the day of was really nice. Well, towards the end of the event, that's actually something that I was like thinking a lot about, is like kind of what direction, like now that I've reached this point, like what now? Like how do we keep pushing for spaces like this, and how do we keep creating these spaces? And one thing that I like really realized while creating my event is that if we don't take the initiative to create these spaces for ourselves, no one really will. Because like the university, like all the spaces that I feel safe at UCSC are spaces that were created because there was a lack. So like EOP, El Centro, um, the art department, like, or the art studio, like those are spaces that like were needed and were created, but they were only created by people who felt the need for it. And so I realized that this event like was one of its kind. Like it was the first event to ever be put like this and like dedicated solely to like artists of color and like highlighting them. And like the main thing being like that I realized is that there are so many artists of color that aren't in the art major at all. And like I feel like that goes back to the fact that like as people of color, we're not encouraged to like pursue creative outlets. We're not encouraged to be artists. Like we're told like you need to find a job, like you need to worry about your survival, like art is just a hobby, or like we're told these things, and it's very discouraging. But like I noticed that a lot of, or a good portion of the artists that had submitted work into my event weren't art majors at all. And that just made me realize the need for like a bigger art space outside of the art department. Because even as it is, the art department at UCSC is so small and like secluded. Like there's no places to really hang out in the art department. There's no places to really eat. Like everyone kind of walks through the art department not really even knowing that it's there. And so like that made me just realize like it's the same case with like artists of color that exist outside of the realm of art. Like they exist, they're there, and they create work constantly, but they're not giving the opportunity to actually like showcase their work, and they're not really supported in that way either. They're not encouraged to do it. And so in creating my event, that's something that I realized. And so I was already talking to SAC, again, the Student Artists of Color, Student Artists of Color Coalition, about like seeing if they would like to continue my event, because most of them are third years. Um, and because like their aim is to create that space of like artists of color to come together and like just talk about how we feel and like what we're doing and what work we're doing and like what we're passionate about. Like I think most of the people in that space are actually not art majors either. And so I was already talking to them to see if they would like to carry it on, because I told them, I was like, I basically figured out the blueprint. I figured out the way to do this. I know how to do this. And if y'all want to continue it, like I will be more than happy to help you continue it. Um, and the day of my event, a lot of people actually mentioned that they wanted the event to continue, that it was going to be a legacy, that they wanted it to be a reoccurring thing every year. But me being a fourth year, like I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it every year, just because like my life is still very uncertain, and given the time, it's very uncertain. Um, but I was trying to find a way to like continue it, because I feel like it's definitely needed. And all these people telling me afterwards like, oh, thank you so much for creating this space, like it meant a lot. Or all these people finally getting to show their work, or these people finally getting to meet each other. Like it was obviously something that we've all been wanting but not really knowing how to do. So yeah, I'm working I'm working to see if I can stay in the area first. If I can stay in the area and everything clears up, revolving this situation that we currently find ourselves in, I do want to continue talking to the Coco and talking to SAC, about seeing if we can make this a yearly thing. And it would be cool to see it grow and see it kind of like keep expanding, and seeing more artists of color get comfortable in spaces that are like art based, that are created for them, because art spaces are so intimidating. Like museums and like some gallery openings, like they just seem so prestigious, and like it can be very uncomfortable to navigate those spaces. But when it's like your own people, or like people who share the same like ideas and beliefs as you, like it's more comfortable and it's comforting to know like so many people like that exist. So I'm hoping this continues. I'm working on it, hopefully. Like going back to my point about like so many artists existing outside of the realm of like the art world, like those artists are just as important, and I feel like those artists are actually the ones that probably need the most support in trying to like come into their power and come into their creative abilities. And I would like to see like how we can keep supporting those folks, because like I something that I learned through this whole experience is like the power of art. Like art is so powerful, and like bringing people together and creating new spaces and creating new ideas. um so I don't know, I would like for those artists that don't really feel like they're artists, or like don't identify as an artist, for them to try to work towards embracing that more, because it's like a very powerful thing to have under your belt. And also it's just like a really good outlet. Like art is just, again, I could go on about how powerful art is and like how healing it can be. But for those artists especially, like I've been there. I know what it's like to not call myself an artist and wanting to call myself an artist and not feeling like I can. But like in my eyes, like anyone who creates in any format, any capacity is an artist, and like those people are powerful.